Restrictor plate racing in NASCAR is one of the most polarizing topics among anyone in the sports universe you can discuss with. Since it was introduced to the industry in 1988, there have been a variety of iterations of the on-track product as it's evolved over time. It was meant to simply slow the cars down and avoid breathtaking speeds of well over 200 miles an hour, as well as strengthening the safety of the drivers. But the consequential pack racing that followed turned it into a must-see spectacle 4 times a year at Daytona and Talladega, separating an aspect of NASCAR racing that no other motorsport came close to replicating. But this racing style has its drawbacks. There's not much driver skill involved, drivers could get caught up in a crash not of their own doing for 10 or more car lengths back, and the wrecks can be straight up frightening at times. Sometimes a factor from the mechanical makeup of the cars can result in a snoozer of a race, letting everyone down and causing outrage, or a select group of drivers choose to ride in the back for a majority of the race to avoid the big wreck, bumming out their sponsors and fans who would rather see them competing for the lead. As far as the feedback goes from each part of the racing community on this kind of action, it varies as you can imagine. The fans generally love it if the package is ideal, the drivers generally hate it because they can't usually control their own destiny on the track and could be taken out at any moment, or even worse, put on their roof, and the owners and team members actually don't care for it either, given that they have to make a deep cut into their pocketbooks to pay and repair all the damage that inevitably gets done to their cars they work so hard to prepare. But wait, that's 2 out of 3 against restrictor plate racing, so why is it still a thing? Well, for one, the fans rule over most everything since they pay for tickets, generate revenue and TV ratings, and that's, what a sport is catered to. But there also isn't anything else you can do about it. Drivers have complained for decades trying to find a way around it, but it's either this or go back to running 220 while risking your life in the process, point blank. Every time there's a demolition derby of a race, the debate rages on about what to do about this kind of racing. But it always dissolves and we keep marching on. Okay, let's just get to the topic of this video. You get the idea. If not, go read a book about it, I don't know. There are some exceptions though when it comes to drivers' taste for plate racing. The Earnhardts, for example, thrived off it, racking up trophy after trophy and basically making it a part of who they were. Which goes to show if you lock into it, it'll generally like you back. They understood how to master it, it was in their nature. But then there's guys like Ryan Newman, Rusty Wallace, and Tony Stewart, who generally found themselves caught up in the firestorm because of their disdain for it. The carnage was alarming at times, and wouldn't you know it, their stats at these 2 tracks weren't particularly impressive. It's like a cop pulling you over after you've been drinking. They can sense the fear. It won't end well for the most part. But for Stewart's case, he was strangely a combination of both personalities. He spent numerous occasions ripping into NASCAR and pack racing, going on tirades about how much he despised it, yet he also excelled at it quite remarkably for someone that wasn't on board with it at all. But the better of his success came at Daytona, winning the July race 4 times, and while never winning the 500, was mighty close in many of them and won several shootouts, duels, and other events in lower series over his stellar career. His natural talent far outweighed his resentment towards it, so why didn't that translate over to Talladega? A common misconception by NASCAR fans is the narrative that Daytona and Talladega are the same thing. While they do have the same layout, roughly the same length, and the same racing product, that's where the similarities end. Talladega is about 1.5 lanes wider than Daytona, and at least in most of Tony's era, the racing surface and how the corners are set up gave Daytona a handling track personality, meaning taking care of your equipment and tires was just as important as drafting. That's not so much the case at Talladega, as you're mostly running wide open at all times with 5 lanes to work with, meaning the risk of chaos is amplified. It was built as a faster, bigger version of Daytona by Bill France, and that vision came to fruition. Now, these differences don't necessarily make up 100% of the reasons why Tony had a harder time at Talladega. Sometimes just plain old horrible luck gets in the way. But it's not just that he had bad results there, he actually had a lot of good ones too. They just happened to be ones that got away from him and could have and should have top deals. Through all the ups and downs though, he only mustered up 1 single win in his career at Dega, and it was in controversial fashion. But we'll get to that later. This needs to start as always, from the beginning. In Tony's first trip to the Superspeedway in his rookie year in 1999, he got a resounding introduction to plate racing by instantly getting involved in controversy. 48 laps into the Die Hard 500, he got a run off turn 2 and shot down below the 31 of Mike Skinner. Keep in mind, this was legal at the time because the yellow line rule was yet to be put into existence. Skinner wasn't having it and moved Tony all the way down to the grass, and neither driver lifted, setting off a multi-car crash that included several contenders for the win. Back in this era, that kind of move was extremely frowned upon. There was an etiquette the drivers followed, and this was a blatant violation of that. Now, Tony actually skated through unaffected and would go on to finish 5th, but Skinner wasn't so lucky, getting turned into traffic and getting stuck in the wet grass as a result of overnight rain. The two would meet up after the race and go over what happened, since this was back when drivers held each other accountable for their actions. Neither was angry with the other, and they let bygones be bygones and understood it was just a racing incident. They both understood they could have done things differently and would move on to the next week. After a strong 6th place showing in the fall that year, things seemed to be on track for a successful run at the biggest and baddest track in the sport for Tony's career. But one season is too small of a sample. The scale was bound to swing the other way and turn his fortunes upside down at some point, which would turn out to be the very next year when he was caught up in his first big crash. With 52 to go, this was just a classic big one at Talladega that was initiated well ahead of him when Scott Pruitt got turned into Michael Waltrip in the tri-oval and the dominoes fell. Tony was well behind the initial contact, but as has been wearily stated, this is plate racing. Innocent bystanders are often victims far more than any other occasion. He would end up 34th, and he finally got a spoonful of the nasty side of this track. But with such a promising projection of a career path that he was on, this was merely a blip. He wouldn't need to get used to this violent trend of a result because he was too talented. Many trophies and championships were in his future, so there was no reason to dwell on one measly bad finish at a track where every driver has experienced the same fate. However, in the all-time classic Winston 500 that fall, best known for Dale Earnhardt's final win in breathtaking fashion, Tony's bad luck would continue with an unscheduled green flag stop late in the going for a vibration caused by loose lug nuts. He would get swallowed up by the pack a few laps later, putting him a lap down. He never recovered and finished a distant 27th, capping off a forgettable sophomore campaign at the Superspeedway portion of a rather successful season that saw a series high 6 wins. That's the thing about this style of racing. It's a bummer when it doesn't go your way, but it has no major impact on your season as a whole. It can be easily washed down the drain as an outlier as you continue forward with where you left off going into it. That's one thing Tony had going for him. Talladega and Daytona are so unique that they have specific chassis and setups catered to those two tracks. It's never going to be a cause for concern as far as an ongoing narrative a team has to deal with for an extended period of time. You either run well or you don't, and you move on to the next race. As it turns out, those 2 races in 2000 would be an outlier for the 20 team because in 2001, Joe Gibbs Racing got their Superspeedway package figured out. What made it more head-turning was the fact that DEI was taking off into orbit with their stable, and the only team that consistently had anything for them was JGR. The Daytona 500 was, well, we can skip that. This is about Talladega. Tony actually joined Fox's Hollywood Hotel in the pre-race show and openly expressed his displeasure for the track, and called it a 190-mile-an-hour chess match, following that up with a statement, "I was a lot better at checkers than chess." But he would be singing a different tune a few hours later. In a race that went caution-free, largely due to the lingering paranoia among the field from what happened at the end of the last restrictor plate race, Tony found himself in position to grab that first Talladega win in just his 5th try. He made a pass for the lead by Sterling Marlin with 28 to go with a push from Kurt Busch, but they had a slight concern with a dent in the left front fender from contact earlier in the race. His car couldn't suck up in the draft behind other cars and pull out and make a move. But that wouldn't be necessary here. He was sitting pretty as the laps wound down and a single file line formed behind him. Tony continued to protect the bottom and hug the yellow line, and it seemed like he had it in the bag. But with 5 to go, the outside lane started gaining steam with Andy Petree Racing teammates Bobby Hamilton and Joe Nemechek leading the charge. With each passing lap, they snuck closer and closer, and with 2 to go, Hamilton was there. Coming off turn 4 to get the white, the 55 got such a big run that Tony couldn't even block it without getting turned, and that hesitant move slowed his momentum. Hamilton was able to get by and held on by controlling both lanes, snatching the win out of Tony's hands. He came home second, but a bitter second it was, after leading 26 consecutive laps and being in prime position to get the win. So in 2 straight years after a stellar rookie showing, Tony got to experience the thrill of surviving with a top 5 finish and the cruelty of plate racing by a crash not of his own doing and a heartbreaking outcome. In just his 3rd season in NASCAR's top series, he had already seen it all at Talladega, but we're just getting started. That fall, a pivotal moment would take place for the trajectory of Tony's career at Superspeedways. He started way back in 37th, and as he often did in this time period, he played it safe and rode in the back for much of the day. But when it came crunch time, he was going to be in the mix. He worked his way forward in the closing stages with teammate Bobby Labonte, but this time they had to contend with a dominant force that was Dale Jr. His car was so strong he could run in half throttle and still be up front. He could basically win the race on his own if he had to. It was going to take a team effort with the 18 of Labonte to overtake Jr. With 8 to go, the two pulled out of line and made their move. On the next lap, Tony got a big run to the outside and pulled alongside Jr. in turn 3, but he lost contact with Labonte and had to settle in behind the 8. On the next lap after that, he got a run down the backstretch and was on Jr.'s inside this time, and the outside lane formed and was led by Labonte. It was 3 wide from front to back with the intensity blasting through the roof. Labonte was able to get a run on the outside and take over the lead with 4 to go, and Tony was able to shake out Junior a lap later and join his teammate, once again being in perfect position for one of them to win at the least. But don't forget, Dale Jr. was really freaking good and his car was even better. He sliced and diced his way back in between them by himself and threw a wrench in their plan. On the white flag, Jr. made his move inside of Labonte and Tony had a choice to make, which seemed obvious. Go with your teammate and decide it amongst yourselves. But Tony didn't do that. Instead, he went to the bottom and got behind Junior, leaving Labonte to fend for himself. He ended up throwing a reckless block on Hamilton and wound up on his roof, while Junior, Tony, and Jeff Burton were left to fight it out for the win as they raced back to the checkered. Maybe if Burton had pushed Tony, things would have turned out differently, but that didn't happen. Junior launched back in front like he had all day and left the other 2 in the dust to battle it out for second, which Tony was able to get. Once again, a chance to win stripped from him, by a car on another level this time. Now let's go back to that move on the last lap. Why didn't Tony go with his teammate and overtake Dale Jr. and let it be a Gibbs 1-2 finish, and rather go with the car he had no chance of beating without Bobby's help and leave him out to dry in the process? Tony denied an interview after the race, but here's my guess. Tony and Bobby had differing philosophies when it came to this racing, and I think Tony made a big picture move by choosing Dale Jr. as an ally. He more or less wanted to survive these races over anything else, and what better way to do that than to link up with the best car? The best way to stay out of trouble was to follow the guy that was never in it. He would shield him from any mayhem that unfolded, as it so often did here. If you're following the 8 car in this era, you're doing something right. He's always at the front and never gets caught up in the chaos. This was that pivotal move I was talking about, and it would pay dividends going forward for Smoke. 2002 would be a dose of both ends of the spectrum for Tony, getting collected in a traditional Dega-style big one when he got crunched into the outside wall on the backstretch with 25 to go and finished a dismal 29th. But the fall race would be where that alliance with Dale Jr. would pay off. In the midst of a tight battle for the championship, this was perennially the most feared race in the latter part of the season, with the highest contenders just trying to survive and keep their points position intact. Now this just so happened to be the last caution-free race in NASCAR, and as a result, the strain put on the engines dealt a death blow to Hendrick Motorsports, with every single engine supplied by them conked out at some point in the day. This would give Tony the points lead, and he knew if he was able to get out of here in one piece, he was that much closer to a championship. With the final pit stops taking place under green, of course, Dale Jr. and teammate Michael Waltrip were in tandem as they so often were in this time period. But Tony was in the mix and had a chance to make a charge if he needed to. As fate had it, Waltrip had a disastrous stop, disconnecting him from contention, and Tony would be the beneficiary, cycling out in second. This put him right behind the 8 car and gave him a golden opportunity to go for the win. So did he pull out of line or give Junior a run for his money? Nope. He stayed firmly put the entire last run and took his second place and went on to the next race. This was back when wins weren't a must at this point in the season and you got rewarded with a strong finish. Like I said earlier, when you follow the fastest car when it counts, you're probably going to stay out of trouble. And wouldn't you know it, Tony would go on to win that championship. Drivers at that level are able to think 2 or more steps ahead. That's how they become elite. Tony may have said he was always better at checkers, but he was playing some 3D chess when he made that impactful decision the previous October. 2003 would be quite similar, getting caught up in an accident not of his own making in the spring with a 25th place result and a strong 3rd place in the fall. To this point, only 5 years into his career, Talladega was just another track for Tony. He had gone through every kind of emotion possible when he left on Sunday evening, except for winning. But that seemed inevitable given he already had a championship to his name and displayed talent that ranked him among the best in the series on a weekly basis. There was nothing to write home about as of now, and I wouldn't have ever made this video if nothing ever changed. But 2004 is where things started taking a turn and a narrative was beginning to form. It's been stated on this channel before and among other NASCAR media, but as a refresher, this was one of the most volatile years of Tony's career as far as his attitude went, which is saying something. It's like he woke up on the wrong side of the bed the entire season and made it a point to piss everyone off somewhere along the way. It's an unwritten rule but well understood through the garage that restrictor plate tracks are off limits when it comes to causing a wreck with any intent whatsoever. But Tony didn't give a, well, you know, at least this year he didn't. With several drivers already at odds with him, he didn't do anything to slow the accumulating displeasure towards him by crossing that line on this cloudy Talladega afternoon. Midway through the race, he inexplicably gave Kurt Busch a tap from behind in the thick of the lead pack and set off a catastrophe, leaving half the field in outrage. There was no gray area, no outside factor as to how this happened. It was all on Tony, and everyone knew it almost immediately after seeing the replay or their spotter telling them what happened. and they were sure to openly express their opinions on the matter.
So maybe a little frustration with the 20 car?
Yeah, we drafted down the front straightaway together real well, and all race I acknowledged he was on the bottom lane. That's cool, you know, we drafted together. I was going to call him on Monday. Dude, everything was great. I don't know why he committed to turn 3 as late as he did. He knew he needed to follow me, and now we're here instead of out on the track. It's a bad finish. So far this year, our 2 worst finishes are on restrictor plate races.
Yeah, because we had our Dodge dealers, UAW Dodges was a good car. We were right in the middle of the pack all day, and it sounds like Stewart started it all, and he started a lot of things this year, so I guess.
Your mentor.
I don't know about that. I don't ride like that.
Do something about that. They need to do that. Is ridiculous right there. He just freaking wrecked it. I mean, he wasn't even, that wasn't even close. He just turned and made it 3 wide and just wrecked him. That's pathetic.
Tony would end up a lackluster 22nd, and I'm sure his response to all the criticism didn't exactly end the animosity towards him or clear his name off any list.
Some of your other fellow drivers pointed the finger at you. Your take on the whole afternoon and that incident in particular?
I mean, I got underneath him and got him in a compromising position, and I started to back out. I just didn't back up enough to get him out of it. But, everybody can say what they want, and the fans are going to say what they want too. I mean, this is a product of restrictor plate racing, and, if they want to script us a script and tell us where they want us to run each lap, that's fine. We can do that too. But, Kurt and I get along good. Sure didn't want that to happen to him or anybody else. Part of racing, Jimmy and I are good friends too, and I know Jimmy didn't turn me on purpose. It's just that's a product of what we have to do here for 188 laps. We got to do it twice a year here and twice a year at Daytona. So,
hey, that was Tony being Tony back then. Deep down, he knew it was wrong, and he had a sense of care towards his fellow competitors out there. But whatever was bothering him on a consistent basis was blocking that out, and he continued to take it out on innocent drivers week after week. Despite the tumultuous season, he would rebound in the fall and finish 6th, and he would somewhat turn a new leaf in 2005, leading to much better results overall and eventually capping off his 2nd championship. But at Talladega that year in April, he would finish 2nd to a dominant Jeff Gordon. Then when they came back in October in the midst of the chase, he finished 2nd again on another tough pill to swallow when battling side by side with Dale Jarrett, and NASCAR threw the caution on the white flag after a Kyle Petty crash. Jarrett was out front by less than a car length. Then the very next year in the spring, he would finish 2nd. Now it's getting to a point where you look at Tony's resume and think, wow, 2-time champion, won dozens of races, he's won at Daytona, surely he's won at Talladega, right? He hasn't? How can this be? To pretty much anyone outside the Earnhardts, you'd be perfectly satisfied with 3 straight 2nd place finishes and 4 top 10s in a row at such a wild card of a track, especially when a huge aspect of it is merely surviving. But you know how narratives are. The best of the best in the sport should conquer the biggest challenges. But let's not forget that Tony didn't even like this kind of racing. He just tolerated it. And he was so good at what he did, he happened to run up towards the front more often than not. If you expected him to have certain accolades when it came to Superspeedway races, that's not what he was interested in. A Daytona 500 trophy, sure, but that hadn't even happened yet. I think he was more than validated with 2 series championships, which is really what defines a legacy. But that's not what we're here for. When is Tony finally going to crack the code and get that monkey off his back? His fortune wouldn't last any longer after that streak, finishing a forgettable 22nd and 28th the next 2 occurrences, albeit that 28th was after getting wrecked on the last lap after the caution waved and he was in the top 5. He briefly bounced back for an 8th place in the fall of '07, but then cratered after a horrendous spring race in '08 consisting of cutting a tire down while leading and then getting swept up in a multi-car pileup with 15 to go to finish him off, resulting in a 38th place disaster. It seemed like Tony had possibly missed his window to win at Talladega. If he was ever going to, it would have been in the heart of his 2 championship seasons when Gibbs had the best equipment and he was getting oh so close time after time and it kept getting taken away from him. If his luck was going south now, how can it possibly get any better as he's getting older? Well, the good news for Tony is that despite all these factors, Talladega is still random in nature. You can be anyone from Dale Earnhardt to a no-name racing for a team that came in off the street and have some sort of chance to win here. Doesn't matter if you're 20 or 55 years old, he had that on his side, and it would be played out right in front of him in the fall of 2008. On a green-white checkered restart in the AMP Energy 500, he led a single-file line, and I'm sure everyone in the entire industry was wondering, how is Tony going to lose this one? It seemed like an obvious answer with 2 drivers behind him that were teammates and relatively new to the game drivers, Regan Smith and Paul Menard. They did drive for DEI after all. However, this was the rotting corpse of DEI. If we're talking the DEI from 4 to 5 years prior, Tony would definitely be dead meat. but they remained perplexingly steady behind Tony for most of the entirety of the remaining laps, showing their inexperience. But Regan Smith would get a run going into the tri-oval and try to make his one move for the win, and ended up going below the yellow line to make the pass for what seemed to be the win. Now hold on, that's against the rules. Although it's maddening to tolerate as a race fan, in 2001 NASCAR implemented the rule where if you go below that line and advance your position, you're black flagged on the spot. So why is everything proceeding as if Regan Smith won this race? His crew is celebrating on pit road, Tony is tossing his gloves onto the dashboard in a pit of rage, and Smith has the window net down waving to the field, as was a ceremonial tradition by the winner. Well, as you may have guessed, this would be overturned and Tony would indeed be declared the winner, promptly putting this finish firmly in the controversy pile. A lot of fans to this day are adamant about Smith winning this race, but how can that be? He clearly went below the yellow line and advanced his position. That seems black and white. Well, as most everything else goes in the NASCAR rulebook, it's not that simple. There's an arbitrary wrinkle that states if you're forced below the line, you're not held accountable and are allowed to keep your spot. And that appears to be what happened here. Everyone has their own theory, like NASCAR always favors the big names and to hell with the underdog, but I feel like the fact that Regan remained below the line so long and didn't attempt to get back in the racing groove soon enough might be what did him in. Forced or not, I still think NASCAR wants you to get back in bounds as soon as you can, and I feel like Regan used that extra space to his advantage and cut in front before returning to the racing lane. But who knows, I'm sure people will tell me it's rigged. Love you guys. Anyway, you can't tell me this didn't mean much to Tony, as he expressed his relief and took in the moment on the radio and in victory lane afterwards.
You have to be able to take the same deal.
Look at Talladega. Woo!
It's a great win.
Oh, and it's a Gatorade bath as he prevails in victory lane. What's it been like for you trying to get back to victory lane?
Yeah, love you too, guys. Man, it's one thing to get back to victory lane, but to do it at Talladega, this is one of about 4 places I haven't won a cup race at, and man, talk about wanting to win. I've wanted to win here for so long. I got so many friends down here, and
Even though plate racing doesn't necessarily define your legacy, and drivers openly oppose it on a regular basis, winning at one of the most challenging tracks with the most exposure is still a big box to check on any driver's resume, especially the most elite. Although this was borderline, Tony still had more than enough chances to add to it and allow fans to move on from this in no time. Surely he would, right? Well, another important thing in Tony's career would come up. This turned out to be his last race for Joe Gibbs at Talladega, moving on to an ownership venture and partnering with Gene Haas to form Stewart Haas Racing. His life immediately got a lot busier and he had much more to worry about in the grand scheme of things besides just racking up accolades. Tony was a true racer, so nothing was ever going to get in the way of his intense competitive spirit, but the first few months and years of this endeavor would no doubt take some time to adapt to. With that being said, if you had his next 5 Talladega races being a 23rd, 35th, 16th, 31st, and 17th place with a combined 2 laps led in that stretch, then right you are. Turns out, this was a lot tougher than Tony expected, but don't chalk all that up to just being an honored driver. This place just wasn't kind to everyone. It let him have his moment and then went back to kicking him around. That's racing. Like I said in the beginning of the video, it can sense when you're not locked in and will take advantage of any bad mood you're in by making it worse. You either embrace it or it'll make you pay. The only time the sun would peek back out was during Tony's final championship run, which came in rather improbable fashion, surviving in a 7th place effort during the tandem era of plate racing. Boo! It was such a stratospheric run, even Dega couldn't hold him back. But after he got that time to soak in a legacy-defining 3rd title, it was back to reality. This time, the track didn't even hold anything back. It slapped this team in the face and reminded him who was boss. After a promising start in the Aaron's 499, which saw an early lead dissolve due to overheating problems, Tony's day was completely derailed after a stack-up on a restart with 4 to go. He was in the top 10, but would end up with nothing to show for it with a 24th place result. But the fall race that year would be the eruption of everything we've led up to in this saga. Coming to the white flag with a pack and a 4-wide logjam, Tony got a big run off turn 4 to overtake Matt Kenseth for the lead, but it was too early and gave him too much of a gap, and the pack would inevitably reel him back in. As they got to turn 4, Tony cut down in front of Michael Waltrip for a rather reckless block, and what transpired from there was one of the fiercest big wrecks this place has ever seen. After ending up on his roof despite having the checkered flag nearly in sight, you could probably guess that Tony had had enough, and he would deliver one of the most epic tangents to the media afterwards in his entire career, which is no small statement. Forget any good graces he had with Talladega, the championship he recently won, or what that elusive victory he captured here did for him. He was done with everything.
sorry we couldn't crash more cars today. We didn't fill the quota for today for Talladega and NASCAR. If we haven't crashed at least 50% of the field by the end of the race, we need to extend the race till we at least crash 50% of the cars, because it's it's not fair to these fans for them to not see any more wrecks than that and more tore up cars. I mean, we still had over half the cars running at the end, and it shouldn't be that way. I don't think any of the wrecks were an overheating issue. That's why I say I think we ought to just tape them off solid and run them until they blow up anyway. I think it'd make it a lot more exciting for the fans. If we don't crash half of the field by the end of the race, they really need to extend it, because I mean, that's what the fans want. They want to see that excitement. I'm upset that we didn't crash more cars. I mean, I feel like that's what we need. You know, that's what we're here for. I mean, and I feel bad if I don't spend at least $150,000 and tore up race cars going back to the shop. So we definitely got to do a better job of that. It would have been a lot more fun if I could have got caught up in one more wreck. If I could have done that, it would have been perfect. I mean, I think if we could make it a figure 8, it'd be perfect. It would absolutely be perfect here. It'd be better than what we got. So that's going to be my vote next week, is that we make it a figure 8, and/or we can go stop at the halfway, make a break, and turn around, go backwards the rest of the way. And then with 10 to go, we'll split the field in half, and half of them can go the regular direction, and half of them can go backwards.
Go off, King. You'd think this is as bad as it gets. Rock bottom, if you will. But nobody ever said Dega was a forgiving character. Never mind the fact that Tony was getting up there in years and his prime was slowly starting to slip away. He was entering the back half of his career, even though his competitive nature showed no such signs of decline. 2013 would end up being some of the darkest days of his career, and Talladega really didn't have anything to do with it. Yes, he finished a lousy 27th in the spring after yet another big one ruined his afternoon, but a broken leg and a sprint car crash would cut his season short, not even participating in the October race. He would be back for 2014, but Tony probably wishes he had stayed on the sidelines. Looking back, he was dealt another lethal blow in the form of a hard impact to the inside wall during the big wreck and finished dead last, and another wreck in the fallback gear when he hit the inside wall on the backstretch, this time 103 laps in, a 34th place. Just let this end already. Believe it or not, things slightly got better for Tony in 2015. I mean, they couldn't get any worse. He started in the top 10 and led 6 laps early in the spring, working with his old pal Junior, and actually avoided the big wreck, but was relegated to a 19th place finish in the end because that's just how Talladega works. And in the fall, he got caught up in Kevin Harvick's antics when he infamously spoiled the end of a thrilling race by robbing Dale Jr. of another Talladega win by taking out half the field to prevent him from losing many more spots in his ailing race car. But finally, in 2016, Tony would run his final season in Cup Series competition, and this violent circus was mercilessly coming to an end. Speaking of violent, he didn't even start in the first 8 races of the season, fracturing his vertebra in a 4-wheeler accident in the offseason. He would start the 14 car in the Geico 500 in the spring, but gave way to Ty Dillon during a mid-race driver swap, who actually brought it home in 6th, surviving a wreckfest of a race and defying all odds of being inherited this curse that Tony manifested. And in his final race at the Superspeedway, he basically surrendered, riding in the back all day, staying out of trouble, and limping home with a listless 32nd place effort. Because why go up in the middle of the storm and risk it all when you have nothing to gain? Tony's legacy was already wrapped up long before this. He just wanted to get out of here in one piece. So in conclusion, how did Tony freaking Stewart win only 1 race at Talladega with him not even being the first car across the line in that win? And why did it unravel at such an alarming rate in the second half of his career? I could go on for hours, but in short, this is the nature of this style of racing. It just is. No matter how great you are, restrictor plate racing doesn't care when you strap in and roll off pit road that day. Ask Rusty Wallace, who never won a single Superspeedway race. Does anyone question his legacy because of it? Nope. He's a bona fide Hall of Famer. But so is Tony. He could have and should have won a lot more, but over the years it's become increasingly more and more miraculous to find victory lane at Talladega or Daytona, much less finish. And as for the latter part of his career and the horror show you just witnessed, don't think this track didn't hear Tony when he eviscerated it to shreds after that race in 2012. Keep in mind, if you hate it, it'll hate you back. And if you think that sounds crazy, remember, this is the same place that told Bobby Isaac to get out of his car immediately from the great beyond, right in the middle of the inaugural train wreck of a race they held in 1969. Talladega was built on ancient Indian burial grounds, y'all. Look it up. And if that still sounds crazy, well, you're probably right. I'm gonna check myself into a psych ward now. In all seriousness, despite all of this, Tony will be remembered for his 3 championships, how determined of a racer he was by fighting through a stomach bug to win a race, and all the trophies he compiled in his all-time career. Not what happened at one wild card of a racetrack, but it's still fascinating to look back on. It would be different if he totally disregarded plate racing and never darkened the door of a win in this kind of speedway. But he was really good at it. He just never got the breaks to go his way, and that's what it takes most of the time. But he did have what it took to be a champion, so don't take this personally if you're a fan of his. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe like your life depends on it. Hope you enjoyed this one, guys. This has been a Platinum Paradise video.